The Grand View Redemption. She bought the crumbling hotel for just $4,683, her life savings and the proceeds from selling her mother's wedding ring. It was a desperate solution to keep a roof over her daughter's head. But when Eleanor Ellie Miller finally forced open the penthouse door that had been sealed for 40 years, what she discovered wasn't just valuable. It was a collection so rare, so perfectly preserved that Christie's valued it at $180 million. And the truth behind it would expose the town's darkest secret. Rain hammered against the courthouse windows as Ellie counted the crumpled bills one more time. $4,683. Every penny she'd saved from 3 years of night shifts at the sewing factory, plus what she'd gotten from selling her mother's wedding ring, the last family heirloom she possessed. Her hands trembled slightly, not from the cold October morning, but from what she was about to do. Next item. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the half-empty room. The old Grandview Hotel on Elm Street. Starting bid is $5,000. Ellie's heart sank. She was short by more than $300. She'd have to watch someone else claim the only chance she had at giving her 12-year-old daughter Hannah a real home, somewhere without mold creeping up the walls. Somewhere her asthma wouldn't be triggered by cigarette smoke seeping through paper-thin walls. The silence stretched. No paddles rose. The auctioneer shifted uncomfortably. Anyone? The Grandview Hotel? $5,000? Still nothing. The locals knew better. That building had been rotting on Elm Street for 4 decades. Its windows dark, its grand entrance chained shut. Stories swirled about why the top floor was sealed, why the previous owners had vanished overnight in 1983, leaving everything behind. "I'll take it for $4,683, Ellie called out, her voice cutting through the silence. The auctioneer's eyes narrowed. "Ma'am, the minimum is $5,000. "That's all I have," she said simply. $4,683. Every cent. Murmurs rippled through the room. The auctioneer looked at the city clerk, who shrugged. After 40 years of decay, they just wanted it off the books. Going once, going twice. Sold to the lady in the back for $4,683. Ellie's knees nearly buckled with relief. She signed the papers with shaking hands, ignoring the pitying looks from the other bidders. They thought she was crazy, a single mom buying a death trap. But they didn't know what it was like to raise a 12-year-old in a moldy studio apartment above a liquor store, to wake up at 3 a.m., to the sound of fights in the hallway, to see your daughter stuff towels under the door to keep out the cigarette smoke. Where are you watching from today? If you're enjoying this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode is truly moving. Let's continue. 2 hours later, Ellie stood in front of the Grandview Hotel with Hannah's small hand in hers. The building loomed above them, 5 stories of crumbling Art Deco elegance. Paint peeled from the walls like dead skin. Vines strangled the fire escapes. "It's scary, Mom," Hannah whispered, her brown eyes wide with uncertainty. Ellie squeezed her daughter's hand. "Only on the outside, sweetie. We're going to make it beautiful again." She looked up at the facade, memories washing over her. 20 years ago, she'd worked here as a receptionist during college, before the owner at that time had suddenly closed the place. She remembered the marble floors, the ornate chandeliers, the sense of history in every corner. Old Mr. Jenkins, the maintenance man back then, used to tell stories about the hotel's heyday in the 1,950 seconds, when it had been the heart of Millbrook. The front door groaned as Ellie turned the key. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light, streaming through broken windows. The lobby still held traces of grandeur, a chandelier hanging crooked but intact, marble floors beneath layers of grime, carved wooden pillars that had somehow escaped the termites. "It's like one of those dresses at the vintage shop," Ellie said, her seamstress's eye evaluating the space. "The bones are good, the structure is solid. It just needs someone to stitch it back together." They spent the first week camping in the old manager's office behind the front desk. Ellie had managed to get running water in 1 bathroom and had rigged up electricity to 3 rooms. Each morning, she'd walk Hannah to school, then return to attack another section of the hotel, clearing debris, patching roof leaks, learning through YouTube videos, and sheer determination how to rewire and replace pipes. The work was backbreaking, but it was theirs. No more landlords, no more rent increases, no more apologizing for existing. It was on the 10th day that their progress was interrupted. A sleek black car pulled up outside, and a tall, elegant woman in her 60s emerged. Her silver hair pulled into a tight bun, her tailored suit speaking of money and influence. "Mayor Hargrove," Ellie muttered under her breath as the woman strode toward the entrance. Victoria Hargrove had been mayor of Millbrook for 15 years. Old money, old power. She stood in the dusty lobby, looking around with barely concealed distaste. "Miss Miller," she said coolly, "I see you've begun improvements. Are you aware of the 37 building code violations this property currently has?" Ellie straightened her shoulders. "I'm addressing them one by one, Mayor Hargrove. I'll be sending inspectors tomorrow, for safety reasons." The mayor's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I've had my eye on this property for years. My family has historical interests here. I'd be willing to take it off your hands for $30,000. That's quite a profit on your investment." "It's not for sale," Ellie said firmly. "This is our home now." After the mayor left, Ellie leaned against the wall, exhaustion washing over her. The inspection would surely result in a list of violations she couldn't possibly afford to fix in the short term. "Need a hand with that wiring?" Ellie startled at the gravelly voice. An elderly man stood in the doorway, weathered hands in the pockets of overalls that had seen better days. Frank Coleman. He introduced himself. Used to be a carpenter. Worked here 40 years ago, before they sealed up the top floor. Ellie's curiosity piqued. Sealed up? Why? Frank shrugged, but something in his eyes suggested he knew more than he was saying. "Folks say old Marcus Webb, the owner back then, just disappeared one night in '83, locked the place up tight, and vanished. Left everything behind." He looked around the lobby, nostalgia evident in his gaze. This place used to be something special, shame to see it like this. With Frank's help, Ellie managed to repair the electrical panel. As they worked, he shared stories of the hotel in its prime, the dances in the ballroom, the famous guests who'd stayed there, the way the whole town would gather for New Year's celebrations. Later that evening, as Ellie inspected the elevator shaft, she noticed something odd. The building had 5 floors, but the elevator had a button for 6, painted over, but still visible if you look closely. She followed the service stairs, narrow and dark, tucked behind a maintenance closet. They led up to a heavy door marked "Private, No Entry." Chains wrapped around the handles, the locks rusted but solid. Someone had really wanted this floor to stay closed. Days turned into weeks. Ellie worked double shifts at the sewing factory, coming home to spend every spare moment on repairs. Hannah helped after school, the two of them forming a rhythm. Ellie teaching her daughter how to sand wood, mix plaster, paint walls. But for every problem Ellie solved, 2 more appeared. The building inspector had left a devastating report. Foundation issues, electrical hazards, plumbing nightmares. The bank sent a notice, 30 days to bring the building up to code or face foreclosure. One evening, exhausted, Ellie sat in what had once been the hotel's library, flipping through an old photo album she'd found in a drawer. Dusty images of the Grand View in its heyday. Weddings, galas, Christmas parties. One photo made her pause. Marcus Webb, the former owner, standing beside a striking young woman. Ellie squinted, recognizing something in the woman's features. She flipped the photo over and read the faded inscription. Marcus and Elizabeth Hargrove. New Year's Eve, 1975. Hargrove, the mayor's family. Have you ever discovered a connection to the past that changed everything? Share in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that touch the heart. The next day brought another visit from Mayor Hargrove, this time with the chief of police in tow. "I'm raising my offer to $50,000, she said without preamble. "The council has approved plans for redevelopment in this area. This is your last chance to walk away with a profit." Why is this building so important to you? Ellie asked, thinking of the photograph. Something flickered in the mayor's eyes. Anger or perhaps fear. This is a personal project, she said stiffly. To remove an eyesore from our community. To erase a family embarrassment. After they left, Frank appeared from the shadows where he'd been listening. She's been trying to get her hands on this place for 20 years, he said, ever since her mother died. Why? Frank just shook his head. Some secrets are buried deep, Ellie. Maybe they should stay that way. That night, Hannah had a severe asthma attack. The dust and stress had taken their toll. Ellie rushed her to the emergency room, heart pounding as her daughter struggled for breath. In the waiting room, while Hannah was being treated, Ellie found herself sitting next to an elderly woman with kind eyes and a number tattooed on her forearm. My husband, the woman explained, gesturing toward a treatment room, his heart again. I'm Ruth Silverstein. As they waited, Ruth shared stories of her childhood in Vienna before the war had taken everything. Her home, her parents, and a family art collection that had been in their possession for generations. There was one painting I remember so clearly, Ruth said, her eyes distant with memory. A landscape with a little cottage beside a lake. It hung in my mother's music room. I was 6 when they took it. I used to lie beneath it while she played piano. When Ellie returned to the hotel with the recovering Hannah, she found Rose Martinez, who owned the small grocery store down the street, waiting with a bag of groceries and some homemade soup. For the little one, Rose said simply, this town needs more people willing to rebuild, not just tear down. It was a small kindness, but it gave Ellie courage. That night, after Hannah was asleep, she made her decision. Armed with bolt cutters and a crowbar, she attacked the chains guarding the 6th floor. They fought back, 40 years of rust, making them stubborn. But eventually they gave way with a shriek of protesting metal. The door swung inward, revealing a pristine hallway. No dust, no decay, as if time had stopped the moment those chains went on. Ellie's flashlight beam swept across wallpaper that should have been rotting but wasn't, carpet that should have been moth-eaten but looked freshly vacuumed. At the end of the hall, double doors stood open to the penthouse suite. She moved forward slowly, every instinct screaming that this was wrong. Buildings didn't preserve themselves. Abandoned places didn't stay clean. But as she stepped into the penthouse, her flashlight found the answer. Climate control units hummed quietly in the corners. Dehumidifiers, air filtration systems, all connected to a separate power source that had been running for 4 decades. Someone had turned this floor into a vault. But a vault for what? The penthouse was enormous, taking up the entire top floor. The main room opened onto a terrace with views across the whole town. But it was the walls that made Ellie's breath catch. Paintings. Dozens of them. Each in its own climate-controlled case, each lit by specialized bulbs that had somehow never burned out. She moved closer, reading the small plaques. Monet, Picasso, Vermeer. Names she recognized from the art history class she'd taken before life had gotten complicated. These couldn't be real. They had to be copies, fakes. But as she studied them, she knew they weren't. The texture of the paint, the way light played across the surfaces, the museum-quality preservation systems, everything screamed authenticity. In the dining room, glass cases held sculptures. A bronze that might have been a Rodin, a marble bust that looked Greek, ancient, priceless. Ellie's legs gave out. She sank onto a velvet chair that puffed dust despite the climate control. This wasn't just art. This was a fortune. Hundreds of millions of dollars just sitting here, waiting. Her mind raced. Who had hidden this? Why? And what was she supposed to do now? That's when she saw the letter. Ellie's hands trembled as she picked up the envelope from the mahogany desk. It was addressed simply, to whoever finally opens this door. Inside, written in careful script on hotel stationery, was a confession that made her blood run cold. My name is Marcus Webb. By the time you read this, I'll be long gone. The art you see here represents my life's greatest shame and my only attempt at redemption. In 1979, I was hired to transport stolen artworks, masterpieces looted during the Second World War and hidden in private collections. I was young, desperate, and told myself I was just a driver. But when I learned these paintings had been torn from Jewish families who died in camps, I couldn't deliver them. I hid them here instead. I told my employers the truck had been hijacked. They hunted me for months. I changed my name, fled the state, left everything behind. But I couldn't leave the art. It deserved to be returned to the families it was stolen from. But I was a coward, terrified they'd find me if I tried. So I preserved it, set up the climate control on a separate grid, paid for its maintenance through a trust that runs out in 2025. I hope someone braver than me would find it. There's a ledger in the desk. Every piece is documented, where it came from, which family owned it. Holocaust museums have databases now. You can find the descendants. Please do what I couldn't. Return these treasures to their rightful owners. Let something beautiful come from my cowardice. Marcus Webb. Ellie read the letter 3 times, her hands shaking harder with each reading. She opened the desk drawer and found the ledger, thick with photographs, provenance records, and names. The Rothstein collection, the Rosenberg paintings, the Silverstein landscapes, art that had been considered lost forever. As dawn broke, she was still sitting in the penthouse, her mind spinning. She'd bought this hotel to save her daughter from poverty. Now she held the keys to a fortune that could transform their lives instantly. One painting sold quietly could mean Hannah's college paid for. A real house. No more double shifts. No more choosing between groceries and utilities. But those paintings weren't hers. They belonged to families who had lost everything. Grandparents murdered, homes destroyed, entire lineages wiped out, except for scattered survivors who had spent 80 years wondering what happened to their heritage. With trembling fingers, she dialed the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. Have you ever faced a moral choice that tested everything you believed about yourself? A moment when doing the right thing meant giving up something valuable? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The news hit Millbrook like lightning. Within 48 hours of Ellie's call, the hotel was surrounded by news vans, art experts, and FBI agents. The quiet town of 8,000 suddenly found itself at the center of an international story. Mayor Hargrove arrived as specialists in white gloves were carefully removing each piece. Her face was ashen when she saw the ledger open on a table, displaying a photograph of her mother, Elizabeth, standing beside a crate of paintings in 1980. "You had no right," she hissed at Ellie. "This was a family matter." "These aren't your family's paintings," Ellie replied quietly. "They belong to the families who had them stolen during the Holocaust." "My mother didn't know," Hargrove insisted, but the tremble in her voice betrayed her. She thought they were legitimate acquisitions. When she learned the truth from Marcus, they had a falling out. She spent decades trying to bury this secret. The FBI agent in charge approached. "Mayor Hargrove, we need to talk about your family's connection to these artworks." As Hargrove was led away, Ellie stood in the lobby watching specialists catalog each piece. An elderly woman made her way slowly through the crowd. Ruth Silverstein, leaning heavily on a cane, her eyes wet with tears. "The landscape with the cottage?" she whispered, looking at a small painting being carefully packed. "It's exactly as I remembered. My mother's favorite." Over the following weeks, the story unfolded. The art was traced to 6 families. Each family had descendants who had spent decades searching. The Rothsteins, whose banking fortune had been seized. The Rosenbergs, whose department store empire had been destroyed. The Silversteins, musicians whose instruments and art collection had vanished. But it was the town that surprised Ellie most. Old Mrs. Coleman from the hardware store showed up with a box of new tools. "Heard you are fixing this place up yourself," she grunted. "These should help." The Martinez family brought dinner for a week straight. Even Ellie's boss at the factory, who'd warned her about taking too much time off, appeared with an offer. "Part-time, flexible hours. We need good seamstresses." The 7th visitor changed everything. David Rothstein didn't look like a billionaire. He wore jeans and a faded sweater, drove a rental car, and knocked on the door like anyone else. But Ellie recognized him from the news. The tech entrepreneur whose grandfather had built a retail empire from nothing, only to lose everything in 1938. 3 of those paintings were my family's, he said quietly as they stood in the empty penthouse, looking out over the town. Including the Vermeer. My grandmother described them to my mother, who described them to me. I never thought I'd see them. He turned to her, his expression serious. What are your plans for the hotel? Ellie laughed softly. Plans? I can barely afford to patch the roof. I bought it so my daughter and I would have somewhere safe to live. Now I'm just trying to make it livable before winter. David was quiet for a long moment. What if you didn't have to do it alone? He explained that his family's foundation focused on community development and historical preservation. This building, what you've done here, it's exactly the kind of project we support, turning spaces of hidden history into places of community healing. I don't understand, Ellie said, confused. I'm offering to fund the renovation completely. In return, I want you to run it, create what you envisioned. Affordable housing, community spaces, maybe a small museum on the top floor about hidden histories and the importance of doing what's right. Ellie stared at him in disbelief. You're serious? You could have kept one painting, David said simply. Sold it quietly. No one would have known. Your daughter would have been set for life. Instead, you made a call that returned my family's heritage. Yes, I'm serious. The renovation took 18 months. True to his word, David's foundation covered everything. But it wasn't just about money. The story had touched something in Millbrook. Neighbors who had barely noticed each other started working side by side. The hotel became the town's project. Hannah had her own room now, the first time in her life. She'd painted the walls purple and hung pictures of Ruth Silverstein, who had become like a grandmother to her, teaching her piano in the newly restored music room. Ellie turned the ground floor into community spaces, a sewing workshop where she taught classes, a daycare for working parents, a library, a commercial kitchen where neighbors taught cooking classes. The upper floors became apartments, priority given to single parents, elderly residents on fixed incomes, and families struggling to make ends meet. But it was the penthouse that became truly special. Ellie worked with the Holocaust Museum to create a permanent exhibit about hidden art, lost heritage, and the courage to do what's right even when it costs you everything. The climate control systems that had preserved stolen art now protected photographs, documents, and stories of families reunited with their past. On a crisp September day, the Grandview Hotel celebrated its grand reopening. The whole town turned out. The families whose art had been returned sent representatives. Ruth Silverstein, now residing in one of the best apartments on the 4th floor, played piano while Hannah turned pages for her. Ellie stood on a makeshift stage in the lobby, Hannah beside her in a new dress they'd bought for the occasion, the first new dress either of them had owned in years. I bought this building because I was desperate, Ellie began, her voice carrying through the packed room. I had $4,683 and a daughter who deserved better than a moldy apartment. I thought I was just buying walls and a roof. She paused, looking out at the faces. Neighbors, strangers who'd become friends, families whose histories had intersected with hers in the most unexpected way. But buildings aren't just walls, they're stories. They hold our histories, the beautiful and the terrible. This hotel hid a dark secret that became a chance for healing. It reminded us that doing the right thing isn't about the reward. It's about recognizing that some things matter more than money. Later, as the celebration continued, Hannah tugged on Ellie's hand. Mom, are you happy we didn't keep the paintings? Ellie knelt down to her daughter's level. What do you think, sweetheart? Hannah looked around the transformed hotel. At the children playing in the new community room, at Ruth Silverstein teaching a young girl to play piano on the donated instrument, at their neighbors sharing food and stories. I think, Hannah said slowly, that we got something better than money. We got a family, a really, really big family. Ellie pulled her daughter close, tears in her eyes. Yes, baby, we did. As evening fell over Millbrook, the Grandview Hotel stood illuminated against the darkening sky, no longer abandoned, no longer hiding secrets. It had become what buildings should be, a place where stories intersect, where communities gather, where the choice to do right creates ripples that spread far beyond what anyone could imagine. Eleanor Miller had bought a crumbling hotel for $4,683 and discovered $180 million in stolen art. But what she'd really found was something priceless, the knowledge that integrity isn't about what you gain, but what you're willing to give up to make things right. And in a small American town, in a hotel that had hidden darkness for 40 years, light finally won. Because sometimes the most valuable thing you can discover isn't treasure, it's the courage to let it go. Thank you for joining me for this story of courage and integrity. Has there been a moment in your life when you chose what was right over what was easy? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that warm the heart and nourish the soul.